Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're going to be talking about gun violence prevention here in this country. Joining me here in the first segment of our show is the Reverend James Atwood, who has recently written a book called Gundamentalism. Thank you so much for being here, Reverend Atwood.
My pleasure.
So I'm interested in what prompted you to write this book, your interest as a minister, a Presbyterian minister. What made you interested in addressing this subject in a book?
Well, I suppose we have to go back to my first experience with guns. I've been a gun owner for well over 50 years. I bought my first gun in a Sears Roebuck, from a Sears Roebuck catalog. And used it to hunt down there in southeastern North Carolina where my church was. And then my wife and I went to Japan as missionaries. And I had a friend in Japan who told me that bring your gun because we've got a lot of good duck hunting and pheasant hunting up here, so bring your gun. So I put it in my belongings and took it to Japan, and we went over on a big ship, landed in the port of Yokohama, and I handed in my customs declaration, and it startled the official, and he said, "Well, we will have to take your gun."
Really? What year was this?
This was 1965.
1965.
He said, "We'll have to take your gun because we don't allow unregistered, unlicensed guns into the country." So he said, "I'll call the Yokohama police and they'll take your gun, and then they will send it down to Kobe, where you're going to be living for the next few years, studying language and all. And the Kobe police will tell you how you can get your gun back." So after a few weeks or so, the Kobe police called on me and brought the gun and said, "Is this your gun?" I said, "Yes, it is." They said, "Well, would you open it and close it?" They wanted to see if I knew how to operate it.
Well, that was a good idea.
And then after we had a few pleasantries, they said, "Now, if you want to get this gun back, you have to do three things. You have to get a doctor's certificate that you are mentally and physically able to care for this gun. Then you have to attend a hunting and gun safety course, and then purchase 2 licenses, one for the nation, one for the prefecture." So I was a little ticked off that I had to do that. After all, I'm an American, you know.
That's right, and you know about guns, right?
How dare they? Roebuck catalog,
right?
You know,
right. How dare they question your ability to own that gun?
And so I was a little ticked off that I had to jump through all these hoops. But then I became aware that there were no articles in the Japanese papers about gun deaths. They just didn't have them. And they weren't replaced by sword deaths either.
Right, no samurai deaths.
Yeah, no samurai deaths. But the year we left Tokyo, where we were living at that time, the year we left Japan, 1974, they had 1 death by guns in the whole country. And in the whole city, I'm sorry,
right.
The whole city of Tokyo, which was the largest city in the world at that time. And I came back home to the United States, and they had 35,000 gun deaths in America. Still, it was rather abstract, the numbers of deaths that we have, but it got to be quite personal when I got a call from the ICU unit at Alexandria Hospital, where the nurse said, "Can you come and visit Herb Hunter? He's dying of a gunshot wound." So I went to visit him, and what had happened was a teenager went to the local bowling alley and complained to his friend that he didn't have any money. And his friend said, reached in his jacket, said, pulled out a Saturday night special and said, "Here, go get yourself some money. And when you do, give me $20 and you can keep the gun." So he went to the Hunter Motel south of Springfield and held up my member, a charter member of my church. And he had his hands in the air and was backing away from him. And he tripped over a rug, startled the boy, and he turned around and shot him. And he died 2 days later. And the next day, after I buried, excuse me, that was long in coming, wasn't it?
It was.
The next day, after I buried Herb Hunter, I drove down to the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence and volunteered my services. And I've been there ever since.
Because it ruined not just the life and the family of the man who was killed, but it ruined the life of the boy.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, there are so many lives that get touched.
The perpetrator.
Yeah.
Like the Virginia Tech incident where 32 students and professors were killed, but the 33rd took his own life as a suicide. So the perpetrator often isn't included in the numbers.
But they died and they have a family too.
And they're people.
It's just, in your book, one of the things that truly astounded me is that you said there were 35,000 deaths the year that you came back, but it's never dipped below 32,000 deaths a year in this country.
That's correct.
I mean, that is epic, the number of deaths. I think also in your book you said that there were 4,500 veterans that died in the 7.5 years of the Iraqi war. And America, you know, we acknowledge our heroes, the people who die on the field of battle. And, you know, Arlington Cemetery is all about those who gave their life in the service of their country. But meanwhile, back at home, there's over 220,000 people that died here on American soil. That's right. While the 4,500 were fighting and giving their lives in Iraq. I know. And so what are we missing that we're not, this is not something that people see as an epidemic, as a public health emergency, as guns in the wrong hands are dangerous. And you know, your example of what you had to do in Japan to keep your gun might have ticked you off then, but it's not unreasonable to expect people to be of sound mind, to show that they can operate the gun, and to have a license locally and nationally so that you know where that gun is and who owns it. Exactly,
yeah. Well, it's a problem. You mentioned public health. For something to be a public health problem, which it's dangerous for a government official to mention public health because you could lose your job, as the recent Surgeon General lost his job for mentioning the possibility that gun violence in America could be a public health issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course the CDC does not have accurate numbers because there has been a prohibition in place for years about collecting data on gun-related injuries and deaths. Mm-hmm. And that includes doctors collecting that information. Specifically, pediatricians are not allowed to ask about guns in the home.
Yeah.
Aren't allowed to ask. Yeah. You immunize your child against mumps, measles, and rubella, but the pediatrician is not allowed to ask if there is a gun in that home, or how many, or if it's kept locked up. Because the mumps, measles, and rubella is not going to kill that child. Mm-hmm. But that gun just might.
Yeah. Well, I have good news. In January of this year, the courts in Florida gave the doctors freedom of speech.
Really?
So that doctors can now, in the state of Florida, they had it bottled up for 6 years, where the corporate gun lobby said, don't ask questions about guns in the home because that's not a medical question. That is a political question, and it is to demean gun owners. That a person who's suicidal, you couldn't ask his family if there's a gun in the home. They had that in the courts for 6.5 years, bottled it up. But in January, they said doctors have free speech. So that's no longer an issue, thank God.
It truly, because according to your book, and I believe your statistics, 90 people a day are dying of gun deaths. 10 of those are children.
That's right.
And it's not just that the children are dying, but in 2015 they actually published some very specific data about the fact that more toddlers, kill Americans than terrorists. And they actually did the data and said, we can point to the number of times a toddler has shot and killed somebody in the United States, an American, and it's far more than any terrorist shootings. And yet the national narrative is about defending ourselves against terrorists rather than disarming toddlers.
Yeah.
What do we do with that?
Do you suppose that Mr. Trump would believe that statement?
Well, he wouldn't, and he would, I'm sure, dismiss it, because all you have to do in this country is to either say you believe something or you don't believe something and get a lot of people to go along with you, and that becomes the dominant narrative.
And when we talk about beliefs, this is where the rubber hits the road with gundamentalists and gun owners.
Absolutely. And and I think the title of your book is so specific because there is a lot of fundamentalism, the way we think of fundamentalism as it relates to religion, that people have transferred that over to their gun ownership, and not in a healthy way.
There is no room for debate, no room for compromise. It's yay or nay. Are you with us or are you opposed to us? And there seems to be no way of getting across that divide. And I think this is where gun owners, responsible gun owners, have a huge responsibility to make this real and
well, I'm going to stop you right there and say that when we come back, that's exactly what we're going to start with. Is we're going to talk about, when we return from this break, about the responsibility of gun owners to really not only understand the guns, but how it interacts and affects the community around them as well. So please join us after this break, and we'll come back with Reverend James Atwood.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
There's more than just books at the library.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me. There's more than just books at the library.
Il n'y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
Hello. You have a lot of great books here today. You know there's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
Even if I try.
back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Tonight we are talking about gun violence prevention. Joining me is Reverend James Atwood. He is the author of the book Gundamentalism. Thank you so much for being here, Reverend Atwood.
My pleasure indeed, Catherine.
So before the break, we were talking about gun ownership and the responsibility of gun owners. It's not just one man, one gun, but they are part of a community. And there are impacts on a community when people own guns, how they own those guns. You know, to the point of the Japanese, they had very specific requirements. People know how they are supposed to treat their guns. Unload them, lock up the ammunition away from the gun. This is how my father kept guns. We had a gun cabinet in our living room, and the rifles were all locked up in a gun cabinet, and the ammunition was all locked up below them. So people know the responsible way to do it, but the spate of accidental deaths tell us that people are not actually treating their guns that way.
They know what they need to do, but they don't do it. For example, 43% of the gun owners in the United States leave their guns in their homes loaded and unlocked. And children who are known to be curious want to explore every single nook and cranny in their home, and they know where Daddy hides his gun.
Absolutely, that is true.
And some of those who leave their guns around loaded and unlocked say a gun in the home that is not, that is locked up and unloaded is like a car in the garage without gas.
I've heard that.
Now, that is, I think irresponsible. And you know, another example, which I quote in the book, is the former director of the CIA under George Bush was arrested at BWI Airport for trying to get a gun onto the plane in his carry-on baggage. He did not, this is a director of the CIA.
Didn't realize it.
And he did not realize he had a loaded gun in his bag.
This happens out at Dulles Airport.
Yeah,
they give the numbers every year.
All
people,
the time.
And it's not people trying to smuggle the gun. It's walking around with a gun and not even being aware that you're walking around with a loaded gun in your purse. And this happens with women. Children have pulled loaded guns out of their mother's purses and shot them.
Yeah, that's... And so this is one thing, they need to be careful. Gun owners need to be careful. And I think responsible gun owners, for the most part, are. And the difficulty comes when we have now 85% of the gun owners in the United States favor background checks for all guns sold. They favor limiting or even banning assault weapons and large magazines where a nefarious person can shoot 100 rounds in a minute.
Right.
They favor these kinds of thoughtful laws which will save lives. But the extremists, the Gundamentalists who control Congress, who control the gun industry, who control even the churches by their rhetoric about don't get political in the church, meaning don't talk about guns in the church.
Right.
You do your spiritual thing, preacher, but don't mention my guns because I love my guns.
Yeah.
And this is the reality where we up the ante with these Gundamentalists who refuse to negotiate, who are interested only, who have never seen a gun law that they liked,
Right.
who want to focus on punishment instead of
prevention. Yeah, that's what I don't understand, because it's first of all, assault weapons are weapons of war, and we don't need them in the streets of the United States unless you expect to have a war. And that eventuality may come to pass if we have this proliferation of these weapons of individual mass destruction. But the fact that it's become an accepted part of our culture, the fact that there are signs posted in windows of businesses as to whether you can or cannot carry a gun in there. There's actually been debates in churches as to whether parishioners can carry a gun.
We have some churches which celebrate open carry laws in their churches, and the pastor comes in and puts his gun on the pulpit and boasts about his that he is ready to protect his flock.
I thought God was supposed to do that. What am I missing?
A lot of these churches have yard sales. They have barbecues where they offer Glock 17s and assault weapons as a door prize. Now, and this happens in churches. That's why I say Gundamentalism is a religious, ideological cult which has Congress by the throat and holds America's cities hostage to so-called God-given gun rights. And that's the phrase. Where did that come from?
Where did that come from?
It didn't come from the Bible.
I don't remember it.
It didn't come from the Constitution.
No.
It didn't come from any political document. It was just said by a gun extremist, and now everybody believes we have, quote, God-given gun rights. It's amazing.
And that it makes no sense. And moving forward, if we don't do something to change the narrative, what impact is this going to have on the younger generation? I'm interested in hearing your perspective, because I have 3 millennial children, and I don't believe any of the 3 of them has ever touched a gun in their lives. I don't know where millennials are with this, because I don't hear them talking about common sense gun laws as one of their marquee issues.
Well, I think it's a multifaceted issue, but we do know that hunting has declined in its popularity.
So is golf.
So is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah, golf has too. I don't know what that. They might be related.
But I know that that this has its effect on how guns are sold and how they're marketed in the United States. The 10th largest gun manufacturer is Cricket Arms. Okay. They manufacture guns for children 4 to 10 years of age. And
what?
The stocks, the rifles themselves are made for kids. They're short, easy to hold. You can even put a telescopic sight on them. They are color-coded. They give the little guns, they're 22s. Right. They're lethal. The cricket guns that are sold to little girls are hot pink. For boys, they're blue, and different shades of blue.
Okay.
So, I mean, this is the 10th largest manufacturer of guns in the United States.
I confess I did not know such things existed.
You didn't read that far in my book.
I obviously did not read that far in your book to see the pink and blue guns.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
So how do we change the narrative? You know, I keep saying that, well, it wasn't me, but Martin Luther King says that the arc of justice is long, but it bends toward justice. I mean, how long is this arc going to be with our obsession for guns? I mean, what is the tipping point? At which point does our collective psyche as Americans say we've finally reached the penultimate where this is just not acceptable anymore?
Well, I think we have to reach a point of total ridiculousness. And I think we're there. I think we're edging closer to that now with the corporate gun lobby protecting the rights of people who are on a no-fly list. They cannot do it because they cannot fly because they're suspected of terrorism.
Right.
So they can't fly, but they can buy a gun. And that vast numbers of these people who are on the FBI's no-fly list are able to walk into a gun show and get guns legally through a licensed dealer.
Right.
And if they can't get it through a licensed dealer, they can get it through some non-professional
a private sale. That's the gun show loophole, right?
Now, how can that, if we're afraid of terrorists, how can we support that? And I think the corporate gun lobby is in a quandary about that,
right,
because it is so ridiculous, as are so many of their policies and the laws which they promote.
So as we wind up this segment, I want to ask you about page 178 of your book, which you said you think that you can convey to our audience. Do you want to take a...
Let me take a look at that.
Okay.
This has to do with, do good gun laws work? Do they work? Just this one paragraph. States that have implemented strong, intentional laws to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people have been very successful. To illustrate how effective they are, consider the last two states to join the Union in 1958 and 9, Alaska and Hawaii. Respectively, they have the weakest and the strongest state gun laws. Correspondingly, the death rates by guns per 100,000 citizens are the highest and the lowest of all of our states. In 2014, Alaska, which boasts of its weak gun laws, has a death rate per 100,000 of 19.2, while Hawaii, with its strong laws, has a death rate per 100,000 of 2.6. Good gun laws work.
That is impressive. Thank you so much for being on the show, Reverend Atwood. I appreciate it. I want to tell people that Gundamentalism, this is the book that you should be looking for. It will answer your questions about where we are and will give you some idea of how to reframe this. Please join us after the break.
Some dreams are universal. Dreams that inspire us. Multiple sclerosis is a devastating disease that changes lives forever. The National MS Society does more for people with MS than any organization in the world. But we can't do it alone. To get involved, visit us online at nationalmssociety.org or call 1-800-FIGHT-MS. This is why we're here. Because nobody dreams of having multiple sclerosis.
What's wrong with this picture? Half of young Americans can't locate economic powers like Japan and India. 20% can't even find the Pacific Ocean. Without geography, our children aren't ready for the world. Geography is everywhere. It's incredible creatures, rhythm, fashion, flavor. It's economics and politics. It's change. Understanding connections between people and places is critical in the 21st century. That's why we created mywonderfulworld.org. Go there now for your free parent and teacher action kits and give our kids the power of global knowledge. Because kids who understand our world today can succeed in it tomorrow.
back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me in this segment is Andy Goddard. He is the Legislative Director for the Virginia Center for Public Safety. Welcome, Andy Goddard.
Thank you for having me.
So I would like for you to share a little bit with our viewers about what made you interested in getting involved in common sense gun legislation here in Virginia.
Well, it's a fairly simple story. 10 years ago, my son was at Virginia Tech. On April 16th, he was in a French classroom and he was shot 4 times in the massacre that took place that day. Luckily, he survived, and because of that, I began to look at how did this happen. I started looking into what the background of the shooter was, how did he get the guns, all those kind of issues. And after the report was published on that event, I went down to the General Assembly in Richmond to listen to what lessons they had learned and to listen to see if there were any things that they didn't seem to want to address in lessons from that event. And I noticed that they picked up a little bit on mental health funding, they picked up a little tiny bit on the school policy issues, but they really didn't want to do anything about the availability of the guns. And so I listened to the other side, the Citizens Defense League and the NRA talk about guns, and I quickly realized that the stuff they were saying needed to be countered because a lot of it was nonsense. So your son Colin Goddard is also an activist when it comes to... He has been, yes, very, very active. In fact, more active than I have. He worked at the state level. I'm the federal level. I'm concentrating on Virginia state level. You know, they say that sometimes you find, the reason in your life and sometimes it finds you. And it seems like the last 10 years have been about how something found you. Yes. And you have turned a tragedy into looking closer at prevention of this ever happening again. Yes. But I have been down to the legislative session. I have not had to sit through the number of committee hearings you have or looked at the number of bills but it is very disheartening year after year to sit in those meetings, to sit in the committee meetings, to hear what people have to say, and to your point, it's nonsense. A lot of it, unfortunately, is nonsense. A lot of it is based on mythology and not on practicality. It's not based on fact. It's not based on science. It's not based even on polling most of the time. It's based on a gut feeling that a gun in my hand makes me feel safer. And honestly, I believe that. A gun in your hand may make you feel safer. Now, feeling safer and being safer are entirely different things. And there is a lot of science, there's a lot of data that shows that actually having a gun in your hand is not helpful for your safety. In fact, it makes you more likely to be injured. If you're even attacked, when an armed person is attacked in a violent attack, if they are armed, they're much more likely to end up being wounded or killed. And I think we've really seen that in domestic violence cases. I work with a number of nonprofits who provide shelter to women who are victims of domestic violence. And one of the things that I heard just last week is that one of the questions they always ask a woman who is about to leave is whether or not there is a gun in the home, whether it's her gun or his gun. They ask whether or not there's a gun in the home. And that's because a woman is 500 times more likely... 500%, 5 times. Yeah, 5 times more likely to be killed. Yes, and that is regardless of whether the gun belongs to the husband or to the wife. Just the fact that there is a gun. Yes, because there is a lot of anecdotal evidence showing that women who own guns, if they manage to get to use the gun before it's taken from them, even at that point, they probably end up in jail. Right. There's a woman in Florida who fired a single shot into the air to frighten off her attacker. And she's in prison. And she's in prison. She's going to be in prison for a number of years. And so the idea of trying to allow the attacker to remain armed, but then arm the victim, is only going to lead to a shootout, which could be, it could go either way. But if you disarm the attacker, then you don't have the shootout. Yeah, and there's just the proliferation of guns, and we talked a little bit about it with Reverend Atwood, the number of women carrying around loaded guns in their purses, which toddlers have pulled out and shot both their parents and other people with. People keep loaded
handguns in their glove compartments. My father did for the entire time of my childhood, and there were 5 of us kids riding in that car on any given day, and in the glove compartment was a loaded handgun.
But I'm sure he told you not to touch it.
Well, I'm sure he probably did. But,
and that's supposed to work with any age child.
Right, and so in the fact that a lot of parents don't ever think to ask when their child is going over to play, or particularly going over for a sleepover, whether that family has guns
and how they're stored.
Right, because then these things happen, these accidental shootings happen, in the family of the victim, and especially with children. I don't even know how people go forward after one child shoots another one, especially siblings. I mean, the trauma involved.
Oh yes, it's massive. I mean, and that's why you'll see many occasions where a child shoots another child, or a child shoots a parent, and the police come into the situation and say, oh well, we won't do anything about it because the family's already suffered enough. Well, how do you get a message out about being more responsible if you don't follow up?
Hold people accountable.
Yes. If someone left poison on a coffee table and a child played with it and drank it and died, everybody would be, oh my goodness, that parent's so negligent. They should be prosecuted, they should be thrown in jail, etc., as an example to other people. But if it was a gun that was left on the coffee table and the kid picks it up and shoots somebody, it's like, oh well, that's a terrible tragedy, let's move on.
So after 10 years of sitting with this subject day in and day out, what is the reason for this mythology that we cannot move?
Well, it happens to dovetail well into the sales pitch of the gun industry. If it wasn't for the fact that they were trying to push the sale of guns, then the fear aspect and all of the mythology that leads to that fear would not be as effective, and so people wouldn't be listening. You've noticed now that gun sales are dropping off because there's no boogeyman to point to drive up sales. They're going to have to gin up some new fear nexus to be able to get people to go out and start opening their wallets again.
Well, how many guns are enough guns? Because I think in Reverend Atwood's book, I saw the number of 350 million.
Yeah.
350 million guns are already here.
Yes, that's what we think. I mean, we don't actually know because
a lot
nobody's
of them are
allowed.
unregistered, right?
Well, virtually every gun is unregistered in America. The thing is that the vast majority of those guns are not going to be part of the problem. The guns that will become part of the problem are the ones that are not stored safely for 2 reasons. First of all, they can be accessed by a child, and second, they can be easily accessed by a thief. And if you get your guns stolen because you leave them in a car unlocked at night or something like that, and in Florida they checked on 2 counties and they found hundreds of guns were taken from people's unlocked cars overnight parked in their driveways. And where do those guns go? They don't go back into the legal market. They go back into the black market, and they're sold to people who can't legally own them. And so that's what's fueling. Another thing that fuels the illegal market is if you look at the guns that are found at crime scenes and traced back to their original sale, which is the only place you can trace a gun to because the subsequent sales are not recorded. If buying a gun from a gun dealer and it ending up in crime was a normal aspect of life, then you would expect the traces to go back to all of the gun shops. But in fact, 60% of all crime guns are traced back to 1% of gun dealers. And 90% go to 5% of gun dealers. So 95% of gun dealers are not providing guns to crime. Well, what's the difference? So this 1% who are providing 60% of the guns to crime, they obviously have something in their sales practices which is encouraging criminals or supplying traffickers or doing something to directly feed into that illegal market. And if we could stop that 1% of dealers, nobody would notice if 1% of dealers were closed, except the people who are getting killed by the 60% of crime guns that they're supplying.
So let's talk about other methods for getting guns. So you can inherit a gun. Mm-hmm. There can be a private gun sale between 2 people. There can be guns that are gifted to someone else. Yes. There are all of these things that are outside.
Some of those things are less problematic in the sense that the seller or the transferor and the transferee know something about each other. The most dangerous situation is when the transferor and the transferee are strangers. Because if you don't ask any questions, you don't break the law. If you don't ask a person if they're from out of state, you can sell them a handgun. If you ask them if you're out of state and they say, yes, I'm from Tennessee, you would be breaking the law to sell them a handgun. Really? So the answer to it is not to ask the question and then not sell it. The answer is, don't ask any questions. Don't show me your driver's license. Don't answer anything. Just give me the cash. And in what branch of the law can you get away with something that dangerous just by saying, I'm going to be deliberately ignorant. I'm deliberately not going to find out so that I've covered myself. Where is a person's conscience who then thinks, okay, I got the cash, I got rid of my gun, I don't care where it goes. And many people who do those kind of sales will tell you, I have no problem sleeping at night because I didn't tell the person to misuse the gun. But that's, you know, that's an idea which needs to be changed, because the guns that are being used to endanger people, that are in the hands of criminals or people who shouldn't have them, a lot of them are coming from private sales. They're coming from theft.
And isn't Virginia one of the major sources of guns just generally? I
Well,
know we used to have the one gun a month law, but wasn't that rolled back?
It was indeed. The thing about the one gun a month ruling was a lot of traffickers, because it's easier to do, would like to buy guns in bulk, because then they only have to go through one transaction. They get a box of guns and they take them off and sell them. The one handgun a month was beginning to bring down our export of guns. Of course, in 2005, the law was weakened by excluding private sales, which meant then that traffickers could go back to gun shows. They could contact people who were collectors of guns, who were not licensed sellers, and they could say, how much do you want for your table of guns? And right in front of a policeman, they could pull out enough cash to buy the entire table of guns, put them into a box and walk out. And a policeman could watch the whole thing. There was no law being broken. So one handgun a month would help us. The thing that people don't talk about in relation to trafficking is we always talk about the fact that we export guns to other states. We're the leading exporter to New York, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. of crime guns. We're also the supplier to our own criminals. If you look at our rate of importing guns to crime, how many guns are traced from in Virginia from crime that came from outside Virginia? It's minuscule. Our own illegal users get their guns in Virginia. And so we traffic to ourselves, and that's, to Virginians, that should be more important than what we do for New York.
I agree with you. And when we come back after this break, we're going to talk with Andy Goddard a bit more about some of the bills that he has seen this year, the bills that he expects to resurface next year, and how we can all get involved in being far more aware of activism around this issue.
Saving for retirement might be easy for some folk, but for others, it might take a little more work. And for those who haven't started, there are still things you can do to catch up.
Oh, that is good news.
Like getting out from underneath past debt. And don't get wrapped up with high-interest credit cards.
Get you some eyes.
Be diversified with your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Your financial goals are not out of reach. The choice is clear. For a happy ending, choose to save.
Everyone with alcohol and drug addiction is in the same boat. With treatment, you can find solid ground. For drug and alcohol information and treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP.
Dude, are you sure you want this tattoo? Because just do it.
Some mistakes in life are permanent. Like hearing loss. To learn how to protect your hearing, visit asha.org.
You've probably heard about heart disease, but did you know that it's the #1 killer of women nationwide? Heart disease claims more lives each year than breast cancer, lung cancer, or strokes combined. But there are steps you can take to protect yourself against it. For more information on how you can prevent heart disease, contact your local American Heart Association or visit their website at www.americanheart.org.
back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking about gun violence prevention. Joining me in our last segment is Andy Goddard. He is the Legislative Director for the Virginia Center for Public Safety. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
So when we went off in our last segment for the break, we were talking about some of the legislation that comes up every year, and it's an enormous number of bills.
Yes.
And you know, I think at one point the greatest goal for the governor anyway is trying to prevent the worst of them from actually ever being signed into law.
Yes.
But a lot of them come back again and again. Tell us what you're seeing.
On the positive side, in our efforts to try and improve the laws, you know, we put the same bills back in. We don't have to redraft bills. That's a nice part about it, because we don't get anything, so we don't have to re-up the following year. We've put in a tremendous number of varieties of bill that would address the background check, from all the way from voluntary, very limited background checks, all the way through to a universal system which would catch every commercial sale. And every year they get voted down, even though they are tremendously popular with the people of Virginia, including with gun owners. On the negative side, there's always a tremendous number of bills related to concealed carry, and usually the vast majority of them are trying to weaken the last pieces of our regulation of concealed carry. We started off, of course, like every state did, with very specific regulations on who could carry concealed and what they had to do to prove their worth for that. You know, these were special people. These were people who were well trained. They were impeccable characters. They were people who were not going to cause a problem. And so the system was set up, and then every year since, it's been chipped and chipped and chipped away. We'll get rid of fingerprinting, we'll get rid of all kinds of other things, and then slowly we'll start adding people who don't have to carry a certificate, who don't have to go through the training, who don't have to do this, who don't have to do that. Now, we basically give away certificates to carry concealed. You might as well have a vending machine for them.
Right.
You know, put your coin in and you get it out. In fact, it is one of the goals of the gun lobby to get concealed carry to become absolutely normal and totally unregulated, at which point you won't be able to tell the difference between criminals and law-abiding people, because somebody with a gun hidden under their jacket could be either.
Isn't that really kind of the core of their entire belief system, that if everybody has guns, we're all safer?
Yes.
So therefore, the answer to gun violence is everybody should have more guns.
Yes.
How does this make any sense to anybody?
It doesn't. It does in some people's minds. It doesn't in practicality. And everywhere you go, where there are more guns, there are more people dying. Now, the number of people who are being killed in legitimate gun uses, where a gun is being used for self-defense, are pretty much uniform every year. It's between 300 and 400 a year for the whole country. So
out of
30 some odd thousand, yes. Right. So, you know, the idea of we have to go towards allowing more and more people to do this this type of carry, because we will reduce the number of people dying. There's no evidence of that at all. In fact, as more people have carried concealed, there are now more shootings for road rage incidents that used to be, you know, waving a finger at somebody, or, you know, making some sort of a gesture, to now pulling a gun and firing out of your window. There are all kinds of places where concealed carry is not doing what it was supposed to do. It isn't making us safer. It's allowing, and the more we reduce the requirements for getting one of those permits, the more likely the people who shouldn't have them are going to start doing that, and the more people are going to end up getting shot.
I think there is also, too, from my perspective, a racial element to this, too. When you say arm more people with more guns, they really mean white people. Because black people with guns are not, they don't own them for self-defense. I think this is part of the mythological narrative of who should own guns. Because the very fact that the one young man who was shot in his car while telling the police officer there was a gun in the car and that he had a permit for it, didn't stop him from being shot by the policeman at point blank range while his girlfriend filmed it.
Yes.
So to me, when you talk about these concealed carry permits, there is definitely, to me, a very racial bias in this.
Oh, unfortunately, there is a lot of evidence for that. If you look at Florida, for instance, look at their stand your ground laws. The way that stand your ground laws are being applied in Florida is in tremendous difference between racial divisions.
Right.
If you're black and you try and claim stand your ground, you very rarely are going to be allowed to. If you're white and you claim stand your ground, you're much more likely to. And one incident, or two incidents that I point to are, the young man was in Walmart, he picked up a toy gun and was walking around in the store with a toy gun and was shot to death. Yeah. However, James Holmes came out of a theater wearing body armor, and he'd just shot 70 some odd people, and he was taken into custody.
Right.
You know, so the fact that he was white and the other guy was black, you can't ignore that. It's unfortunate, but
I don't hear
it is
people
a factor.
saying, really, that the NRA and the people in that particular group, and the people, quite frankly, in our legislature, who are pushing for expanded access to guns and weaker, they're white. They're, you know.
Well, look what happened in California when the Black Panthers decided to arm up. Ronald Reagan immediately jumped in and changed the laws to try and disarm that particular group. And so, you know, we've got some racial problems. We're not a post-racial society yet, and it shows up in many things, including the issue of guns.
Talk a little bit about the technology that would allow a gun only to be fired by the person it's registered to. And I mean, we have technology. It's 2017.
Yes.
These are not muskets.
I have a cell phone.
Right, you have a cell phone with apps on it.
Which won't let me have it on it
right,
sometimes.
well, without your thumbprint,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
What is the objection to that form of gun safety per individual gun?
Well, I'm not exactly sure, because there's no logical explanation. There is a fear, which I think came from a bill that was in New Jersey, that if these guns came on the market, that states might want to turn around and say, okay, from a certain point onwards, every gun that's sold had to have this technology. And I think that's kind of foolish. I believe that people should be allowed to make a choice and choose a weapon that suits their particular requirements. And if you want to keep it on the coffee table loaded and it has your fingerprint recognition, the chances are your kid's not going to use it. If somebody steals it, it's no good to them. It's just an expensive rock. And it would be, I can see no logical reason why we don't do it. But the gun lobby is so well organized that the breaking the barrier, breaking that ice barrier, is going to be the problem. Because people who've tried, people who've said, oh, I'm going to bring 3 of those from Germany just to see if they're any good, see if it works. They have been pilloried for trying to do that, and their stores have been boycotted, and it's like, no, we don't want that first one, that camel's nose under the tent. We don't want the first gun to appear in America. And yet, we're the world leaders in a lot of technology. Why can't we do that with guns? I wish I knew.
So what is the way forward? How do we change this narrative? It seems like we're always playing defense, defense, defense.
Well, we have to at the state legislatures, because the NRA has noticed that they can't get as much through Congress as they used to. If you can't get something at the federal level and you get it at 45 states, then you don't need it at the federal level. They switched their tactics to pushing legislation through state houses. We now have 26 or so many states that have stand your ground of some kind, and they're trying to constantly to get that expanded to all states. We've got now the National Knife Association has taken a leaf from the book of the National Rifle Association, and they are pushing the deregulation of switchblades throughout the country, and they've already succeeded in many, very secretly and quietly, going through state house after state house, getting those things deregulated. And while there's nothing wrong with a knife that it comes from it deploys with a button, usually those knives are actually weapons. They're not, don't have any use other than being a weapon.
They're not cutting
we don't want our
meat and
gang
cheese.
members.
Right.
Yeah, we don't want our gang members carrying switchblades.
Right.
Because it's just not going to make life a lot better. So the problem here is we have made some strides. When I first started doing this 10 years ago, the gun lobby would come to the General Assembly with a shopping list, and they would go away with some items on that shopping list. Over the years, we have fought them to a straw, to a standstill, where we ask for things, we don't get it. They ask for things, they don't get it. And that's where we are right now. There's been, this last year we were stopped from all our good bills, and a number of bad bills got through. But luckily the governor stepped in at the last minute and vetoed many of those bills, and the vetoes were sustained in the houses.
And I can't say enough to the people watching that 2017 is a very important year in Virginia, because not only are we looking to put people in the House of Delegates who support common sense gun laws, but we need a governor in the governor's mansion who's going to veto bad bills. And how many bills were there? 20?
There were 95 bills if you count the 3 knife bills this year in a 6-week session.
95 bills, that is incredible.
Which meant that on one afternoon we had 26 bills in one committee. And 18 of those we had an opinion on that we had to express somehow. And the balance we just listened to make sure that they didn't turn into Trojan horses and be changed into something else.
Well, I can see why this keeps you busy all the time.
It certainly does, yes.
All the time.
Yeah.
Well, I think people need to, regardless of whether candidates at the House of Delegates level are bringing it up or not, one of the things that people can do when they go to town hall meetings or when they are in candidate forums is to raise their hand and ask questions about where candidates stand on common sense gun laws.
One of the things I don't think that people understand is that what are their representatives pushing at the General Assembly? If you have a situation where 93% of Virginians support background checks on all gun sales, and yet 66 out of 100 delegates are going to vote that down, where is their representation?
Right.
You know, they're 66 of our 100 delegates are representing 7% of the population? I don't think so.
The math doesn't work very well.
No, it doesn't work at all. One of the things people need to ask is, what are you pushing? And look at what their positions are. And if they're opposed to those positions, let the people know. Because we hire these people to go to the General Assembly and put in laws that reflect our desires and our needs and our values. And if that's not happening, and another good way of seeing that is to watch these committees, which are now going to be videotaped, or actually shown live, I believe. And so people should go on occasionally and see what people are saying in the General Assembly about guns and see if they are comfortable with it.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being here. You and Reverend Atwood have really addressed these issues in a way that I think our viewers are going to understand and get involved with. And this is what we need to do. We need to get more involved. We need to help people understand how they can engage this year, which is an election year, to get the word out as to what our values are as a community.